There's a lot of marketing material, a lot of sale books that you guys will get in the mail this spring, and there's a lot of logo type information. And so we're going to kind of talk through that. We're going to talk about some registration numbers and symbols and various things that to bring some awareness to that data and to that literature. One of the first things that I want to discuss is this Powered by Angus logo and this brand. This came out of the communications department last spring and was released this fall. And really what this is about is bringing some awareness around that registration number, bringing some awareness around the program that those registered bulls come from, and really the power of that Angus database and all the information that is around that Angus database. And that's because of all the phenotypes and genotypes that our seed stock producers and our members submit each week. That evaluation is done each week, and that database is very robust. This is really perfectly aligned with the national ad campaign. You may have seen some of these ads this fall. That picture, of course, that's illustrating a couple bulls that look the same. In fact, that's the same bull. But really the message there is one of those bulls is powered by a database that's got 80 million data points, and the other has no information. The bull on the left has data and predictability behind him, a pedigree, and some information. The bull on the right, there's really no program and really no reputation. And so there's a lot of bulls in the country. They look good, they're black, they're slick, they're polled, and I think the message here is make sure those bulls are certainly registered. As we draw attention to those registration numbers, I think it's important that we look at those symbols. And in fact, I got a call on New Year's Day at about 7:30 on New Year's morning. And it was a gentleman from Texas, and he had bought some bulls, and they were DNA tested, and he knew they were DNA tested, but there's some of those bulls that had asterisks in front of those reg numbers, some didn't. So we talked through that, and that's pretty powerful information when you realize what's behind it. It's signifying not so much that bull's DNA tested, but there's parentage around that pedigree. And not only does he match his sire parentage, but he also matches his dam, and he matches the mating that was submitted. And so when you think about that, that means there's parentage on file for both sire and dam, and it's a match. That's done through DNA testing. There's about 600,000 progeny right now in the database that have that asterisk. That hashtag sign, that's kind of a hip thing to say, that Will Harsh told me about. That signifies our Pathfinder program. That program was released in 1978, the same year CAB was developed. It was intended to identify superior cows, and it's still around today. There's about 130,000 progeny that have that sign in front of their registration number. Those cows need a ratio 105 for 3 calves. And they need to calve on time. And so that's still available today. And then, of course, you'll see it in front of a sire's registration number as well, if he's got daughters in production that have gained that status. 1977, the plus sign came out. It simply designates that that's a calf that came from an embryo and a product of embryo transfer. There's about 13% of our registrations annually that make up or will have that plus sign. So that's about 39 to 3,000 progeny each year. Those symbols on the right, I'm not going to get into too deep. In fact, if we were to tally all of those up together, there's only about 600 animals in that database that would have those. That percent sign is just to decipher if that animal was a product of intentionally splitting an embryo or it happened naturally during that embryo transfer process. The caret sign, just a genetic copy from a stem cell through cloning, a cloned animal, and then lastly, the @ sign there was a clone from an embryo. Also, around that registration number, you'll see some genetic condition status. Of course, at the American Angus Association, if those animals are clean or free by pedigree, depending on the condition, there's no testing required. But there was a policy put in place just a few years ago that required all AI sires to have a full panel done to them, and all those conditions be tested regardless of their pedigree. Just a procedure that was put in place again, and so you'll see some AI bulls or yearling bulls that breeder went ahead and got the full bundle test, and you'll see all those AMF, all those conditions listed around that registration number. In fact, in our national bull sale, we would have some bulls that have had that done to them. I'm not, but that's what that's signifying. We've got 21 EPDs currently that are generated out of the association and managed through AGI, and 7 dollar value indexes. That QR code, you're welcome to scan that on your device. That's going to take you to the website. It's going to take you to the page that has all those definitions of each trait of merit and all those $7 value indexes. We're going to get a little short on time if I were to go through each one of those. But the one thing that we do see on occasion is this I that stands for an interim EPD. That's simply the average of the two parents. That animal would be registered. That animal at this point would not have any information around that particular trait. Once there's some data turned in around those particular traits, such as birth or weaning, that I goes away. There's some accuracy starts to build around that EPD, or if that animal's genomically tested and has some accuracy value around that trait, that I goes away. That is what that I stands for, is just the average of the two parents with no accuracy. That's just a screenshot, an online lookup of those 21 EPDs and those $7 indexes. If we were to look at CED at the very top, or birth weight for that matter, this is a pretty highly proven bull in the population. He'd be a plus 4.4, for birth weight. The next line or row would be that accuracy value of 0.97. There's a percentile rank below that of top 35% among current sires. And then you can see there's a little over 12,000 birth weights that have been submitted on that individual animal. There's a lot of information, I think, as you dig into that. Something that's fairly new on this feature would be those phenotypic traits that are circled in purple. That is actually designating that there's data that was turned in on that particular animal. This is cool to look at, especially on non-parents, that you can look up and see what traits have been turned in that contemporary group. So on this particular bull, there was a birth, weaning, yearling, and all the ultrasound data turned in on him. Genomic testing. I get this question quite a bit in the field. If you look at a sale book, sometimes those EPDs don't have accuracies assigned to them on those non-parents for simply the sake of just space. And so we've got some logos that signify those bulls or those females have been genomically tested. AGI GE-EPD is just kind of a universal logo. The breeder may also use, depending on the lab that he submitted that DNA through, this Angus GS or that HD50K logo, you'll see as well. And really, not to get too much into genomic testing, but it does take into a lot of different things. It enhances the accuracy of that EPD. It's very much like that non-parent has had 21 progeny to 25 progeny turned into the database. There's more predictability in that. And of course, it takes into that genomic relationship in that pedigree. This is a fairly popular brand that you guys see, or a logo of that certified Angus beef brand. These are some carcass specifications, and this is some really neat benchmark data. A few years ago, this data was analyzed, and there was about 8,600 sire identified carcass records that were utilized. This is all member submitted data, and with that analysis and probably some regression, Kelly, you would have worked on this, but if we're looking at marbling and dollar grid combined, what this data suggested to attain a 50% certified Angus beef acceptance rate using these two tools in tandem with each other, there's some predictability there. So again, it's a benchmark. At the time, 2 years ago, when those specs were released, those EPDs, at that time, that 0.65 marbling was about the top 25%, and dollar grid was about the top 25%. Today, for non-parents, that 0.65 this is still accurate, but that ranking has slid just a little bit because of genetic trend, and it's at about the 40th percentile. Dollar grid, because it indexes ribeye, marbling, fat, and carcass weight, which there's several EPDs in that index, it is not slid. It's at about top 25% still today for those non-parents. And again, what this is a visual marketing tool to make bull buying simpler for folks that want to target the brand and produce CAB carcasses. Is what it's intended for. There's about 1 in 4 non-parent bulls that would actually qualify if you put those two sorts together. So it is a logo that has certainly some merit to it, and it's not an endorsement for single trait selection, I'll certainly say that. This last shield or badge I'd like to discuss, this is, we have right around 90,000+ cows enrolled in this program. And in Maternal Plus, it's a voluntary inventory-based system, but to have this badge on your females and use it in some marketing documents, the seed stock provider is required to submit heifer breeding records, submit all the information on his cow herd each year in terms of calving and reporting if she had a calf and the performance information associated with this. And this is whole herd maternal performance data that is information for that seed stock provider to use. And they've taken it to a next step to better benchmark and show what they're doing within their herd in terms of that documentation for maternal performance.
First thing that we get into, and a question that we always deal with at the onset, we take inventory of cows, we figure out how many bulls we need to turn out, and so just put a slide up here to kind of address the concept of what kind of bull power do we need going into breeding season. We're ultimately trying to get those cows serviced and settled and calving as early in the ensuing calving season as possible. So some conservative estimates, when we look at yearling bulls, and they've actually passed a breeding soundness exam that first time. Kind of the bottom line figure that I always go with on this thing, when we're looking at yearlings, about 1 cow per month of age is what they ought to be able to get covered for you in that first breeding season. So if we're looking at turning out bulls and we know they're yearlings, I always like to look at that, how old they are at the point we turn them out. We know what's going to happen with bulls as we start breeding season. Their interests change. They're not going to eat enough. They're going to tend to lose some weight during that first breeding season. So if we're turning out bulls, let's say they're 15 months of age, the beginning of May, we figure they're going to cover 15 cows apiece through whatever our defined breeding season is, be that 45, 60, 90 days, whatever the case may be. As those bulls grow and reach maturity, by the time they get to 2 years of age, we typically talk about They're kind of like a professional athlete in the prime of their career. They ought to be good for about 25 to 35 cows for a few years, and eventually we get to a point where we know that they're going to get a little more brittle, be more likely to break down, and I've got that on another slide where we kind of talk about up to the age of 6. Bulls are in that prime of life. They get past the age of 6, and they just flat out get a little more likely to break down on you. So the whole goal, when we think about ample bull power and getting enough bulls out there to cover all the females early in breeding season, that concept of getting the cows bred quickly so that we're having calves earlier in the following calving season, and whenever we wean, whatever date that is, and in a lot of commercial settings, that's going to be when we can and when it fits into management. But if calves are growing roughly 2 pounds a day up to the point of being weaned, if those cows calve 1 heat cycle earlier, that equates to about 40 pounds of extra pay weight we've got in a set of weaned calves. So bull power and the proper bull to female ratios become important relative to just how much pay weight we're taking off that following year of weaning in that particular respect. That's what I mentioned a minute ago. Up to about age of 6 is about prime of life for a bull. It's not to say that you're not going to hear of bulls that are 8, 10, 12 years old still breeding some cows, but once we get past that age 6 breeding season, they tend to be more likely to break down, and I think everybody's got to assess that for themselves relative to what kind of risk they want to take of pulling bulls that might have gotten injured and might have left some cows open on them relative to your bottom line and your production costs. Purchase price, and what does it actually cost us per cow when we think about what's our investment? And across the top of this thing, I've just got different purchase prices of bulls at 3,000, 6, 9, or 12. We're looking at this relative to the amount of cows they're going to cover or just the seasons that we're going to use them over time. And so if we assume that that yearling bull covered 12 cows, that as a 2-year-old he covered 25, and that he got 30 a year up to the age of 6, we're just taking that initial purchase price, dividing it by the 157 cows serviced. And if you look at those numbers in orange, it looks like a pretty cost-effective thing to invest in a good bull and think about what he's doing for you in terms of being the full-time employee that checks heat, puts the cow in the chute, does the semen thawing, the artificial insemination, and delivering that to where it needs to be. Even if you're paying $12,000 a bull, $76 a head over his lifetime in production is pretty cost effective if we think about the value of genetics and what a good bull can add. Another way of looking at that is just what our cost per year is. And if we take each one of those purchase prices and think about it over time, we're looking basically somewhere between $500 and $2,000 a year that we've got invested in those bulls. When we think about EPDs, and Jeff does a nice job this morning of talking about all of them we have. I can remember giving this discussion early in my career. We used to talk about 4 genetic predictors we had in most beef breeds. Now we're up into the 20s when we think about the amount of EPDs and the dollar values that we report. And so I think how you approach EPDs and how you use them to your advantage becomes a matter of working through several things that we list on this particular slide. And I'm really big on it. It is unique to your own situation. You need to analyze your own production system, and you need to take a look at several things that are existing in the production system that you own or manage. First one we talk about is to take a look at your current level of herd performance. You're going to have to measure these things. We always say it's tough to improve something if we can't quantify where we're at with it at a given point in time. And so whether it's taking weights on cows and calves and breeding status, stuff like that, whenever we wean off, or some of that other data that we collect throughout the year, we need to kind of know where we stand on a whole herd basis in terms of level of performance. Second thing is we've got to think about our marketing program. For all those EPDs and genetic values that we currently have at our disposal, typically when we market calves is going to dictate that there's only a handful of them that become really critical to us in our operation and impact our bottom line. Thinking about this from a commercial cow-calf standpoint, and we'll work through an example here a little bit later. Third thing I list on there, are we looking at using bulls as terminal sires, or are we going to be keeping heifers back, actually developing our own replacements? Very important concept relative to where we're going to be able to focus more of our selection pressure. And final thought on this one is that sire selection is critical. The majority of genetic change over time is a result of sire selection. Selection pressure itself is a really precious commodity. We don't want to squander it on traits that don't actually improve our bottom line or lead to potential profitability. So, yeah, when it comes to EPDs themselves and how we use them, one of the first big things about EPDs is that they're comparable across time and geography. What do I mean by that? It means that if we have measured the current level of performance in our cow herd, and we think about the value of that registration paper itself, we can use that pedigree lookup feature that Jeff talked about in his presentation. Whatever bull or bulls in our operation sired that set of cows that are achieving a certain level of herd performance right now can be used to compare to the next set of bulls or bull that we're interested in using. So the time aspect of that, the geography aspect of that, EPDs on animals are directly comparable across time and geography. Big advantage that we got. So that registration paper has value, and we can use that as long as we've got it on file somewhere, because the EPDs change as more data comes in. Those bulls that we may have bought 3, 5, 7 years ago, it's important to look up current genetic values on them to relate that to that level of performance in our cow herd. I got an example that we work in here in a 15-minute presentation. Obviously, we're short of how much time we have to show different examples, so I just pulled one up that I used in my cow-calf production class from a couple months ago. But let's say in our cow-calf operation, when we weaned this fall, we found that we've got 1,400-pound mature cows. 85% of them were pregnant when we preg checked that day. We weaned off an 82% calf crop, and those calves average 500 pounds. We do a little math and look at some performance parameters. The pounds of calf weaned per exposed female, taking that percent calf crop weaned into account, means that we're weaning off 410 pounds of calf per female. If we look at those 1,400-pound calves weaning off 410 pounds of their weight, they're actually weaning off a little over 29% of their mature weight. So what does that mean to us? Well, in this operation where we sell calves at weaning, to keep some heifers back that are going to become our next generation of cows, we take a step forward and we do that pedigree search and we look up some bulls, and we're going to say in this case we've had 5 herd sires over the years that are responsible for siring that set of 1,400-pound cows. In orange, we've got the average EPDs of those particular bulls that we can equate to that current level of performance. Now, we're going to say we're considering adding this new herd bull. He's obviously going to sire our next set of daughters, and his EPDs for reference, CED, weaning yearling, all through $B of what you got down there in the bottom line in black on him to take into consideration. So what does that mean to us, and what can we expect in the next generation? I always say EPDs all by themselves are not very useful until we compare them or put them in context and think about what we're trying to do or what we're trying to accomplish. For the sake of this example, what do we expect in the next generation? Well, that new bull we were considering had 20 pounds less mature weight than the bulls that we had been using. So as we look a few years down the road and we're looking at mature weights on those 4 to 7-year-old cows, we're going to expect them to weigh about 1,380. The bull that we used, or the bull we're considering, was actually higher in his percent heifer pregnancy. So as we relate that to the existing cow herd and go a generation down the road, we should bump our pregnancy rate up to 91%. Accordingly, we're going to see an 88% calf crop weaned. We're still going to average a 500-pound weaning weight on those calves because we were actually the same in the weaning weight EPD of the new bull compared to the bulls we'd been using. But if we relate back to some of those performance measures, a cow herd productivity, the pounds of calf weaned per exposed female is actually going to bump up by 30 pounds as a result of improved pregnancy rate, percent calf crop weaned, and our percentage of mature weight that cows are weaning off is actually going to bump up by about 3% to 32, because we're looking at taking 440 pounds of weaning weight off of 1,380 pound cows. So just a quick example. We could go through countless examples, but that one that we throw at you, the expectation of what we see in the next generation. Apologize, I know we got a mic cutting out here, but final thoughts that I leave with you. Anytime you are considering the bull that you're going to evaluate and purchase or use by AI, first take a look at your own operation. Think about those things that we list on that slide about analyzing your production system. Think about where you're at, when you market, how you're going to use that bull. It's going to lead you down the path to determine what EPDs are more important to you and what traits you want to improve and what you can expect a generation down the road after you've done that.
Today I'm going to talk about bull fertility and bull performance. And while there are a number of factors that go into bull fertility and performance, what we're going to discuss today is looking at how we can manage certain traits or certain areas to help reach the genetic potential of our bulls that we select. But first, I like analogies, so let's take a step back and think about an analogy that relates to bull performance. The question is, what makes a good athlete, right? If we think about a good athlete, there are oftentimes some genetic influence that goes in, maybe some physical attributes such as longer arm span in Michael Phelps, or maybe a height advantage in some of the other sports. But if we take those out of account, a good athlete is going to be one that prepares in the off season. Right? They're going to get into condition, they're going to probably eat right, have a meal plan, go to the weight room, and so on during the off season, which then leads them to perform at their best during the season that they compete in. If you take the Oklahoma State Cowboys as an example, right, the first time that they hit the field for the season probably isn't the first time that they practice as a team or get their game plan together. Rather, they're going to be the ones that are conditioning leading up to that first game throughout the year, and we can think of that as well with our bulls. Looking at making champions in the off season, just like our sports team does, we can relate that back to our bulls as well. So according to the Noble Research Institute, the top 6 factors that affect bull fertility are listed here on the screen, right? We have disease, physical characteristics, nutrition, an inaccurate bull-to-cow ratio, a lot of inattention to bull behavior on the management side, and then also heat stress. Now, this heat stress can happen leading up to the breeding season or during the breeding season. If we think about spermatogenesis or the formation of the sperm cells, that's going to happen 2 months prior to that bull or that sperm actually fertilizing that egg. And so heat stress can occur leading up to breeding, affecting fertility. But for the purpose of this presentation and our time and discussion today, I'm going to be focusing there on numbers 2 and 3, looking at the physical characteristics and also nutrition and how those impact bull fertility. So as they say, failure to prepare is preparing to fail, right? And we can put this into account with our bulls as well, looking at 3 key factors that affect how we prepare those bulls and how that affects their performance. First, starting with the condition that the bulls are in. Second, the breeding soundness exam. And then third, looking at how the nutrition program is both prevalent and relevant to affecting the fertility in our bulls. So let's start off talking about the condition of the bulls. It's important to assess bull condition at least 30 days, more ideally closer to 60 days prior to turnout. Right? We're looking at bulls to meet a condition score of around a 6. Now this number can fluctuate a little bit based on your operation and the environmental conditions that your bulls experience. On our younger bulls, we want to be closer to that 6 because we know that they can get strung out a lot quicker than our older bulls, but about a condition score of 6, which means that there's no skeletal structure showing and a fine fat layer that they're able to have on reserve. Now, it's important to remember to take off weight or put on weight as needed gradually over time. Each condition score is about 100 pounds of weight put on or taken off. And so we want to be doing this over time to help with the overall longevity of our bulls. Now, moving into the breeding soundness exam, the breeding soundness exam should also be done over the same time period, 45 to 60 days prior to turnout. And this is typically done by your local veterinarian. But just quickly going through that list of what the veterinarian will be going through. First, looking at the condition of the bulls, like we had just talked about. Second, looking at any structural defects or soundness, maybe some foot rot, hoof angle, maybe some warts that may be affecting the overall soundness of your bull. And then looking at evaluating their eyesight and teeth, both their internal and external reproductive structures, and then taking a semen evaluation to look at ejaculate volume, as well as sperm cell motility and morphology. And then finally, might test for any infectious diseases. So this is just a quick list of what they may be looking through, but remember, this is just an investment that you're making to the fertility and performance of your bulls. So there was a study then that looked at how body condition in particular affects the breeding soundness exam, whether or not they pass or fail. And this just shows that when a bull is in a condition score of 4 or less, that half of those bulls would pass a breeding soundness exam. When we can add weight to the bull at around a 5 or 6, we're looking at closer to 2/3 to 3/4 of them passing. So there's a direct relationship between the condition that our bulls are in to whether or not they are fertile and sound for the job. Now, there was another study done that put some more numbers to this, looking at multiple sires over 2 years. Here we have, in the first year, a control bull. Those control bulls are defined as ones that didn't undergo a breeding soundness exam at various ages, compared to a bull that was either 80% or more normal sperm cells or 70% or normal sperm cells. And that 70% is the lowest threshold that we claim to be able to pass a breeding soundness exam, 70% morphology. So you can see the number of cows exposed there on the first line and the percent pregnant and the differences between that. And so if we can expect a 5 to 6% improvement in our pregnancy rates for our females, what we can then expect is a 5 to 6% more calves on the ground, right? And if we think about feeder calf prices today, 5 to 6% improvement is more money in our pocket. Next, moving into bull nutrition. As a nutritionist, this is kind of my favorite area, and it's an area that really impacts bull performance altogether. We know that nutrition plays a key role in body condition, in overall soundness, and also fertility. Now, it's important to ask yourself, when thinking about bull nutrition, after you purchase those bulls, is what was the bull's diet at the time of purchase, and what will the bull's diet be as I bring them home or put them out on pasture with the cows eventually? Right? We know there's going to be a lot of changes in that bull's diet, and so we need to make sure that they are both metabolically ready for that within their rumen and physiologically ready for that in order to meet their nutritional requirements all at the same time. Also, need to ask yourself, does the bull still have growing to do? Right? Do we have younger bulls that need that protein and energy requirements in order to grow themselves and also keep that condition on throughout the breeding season, and make sure that they have the exercise that's available to them as we turn them out on pasture eventually and expect them to cover our cows. Now, one comment I'll make on protein and energy requirements, there's a lot of variability here with environmental conditions and other factors, and so for the purpose of time here today, I won't be covering that. I'd be happy to answer some questions here later, but for today, we're going to be focusing more on the mineral nutrition. Right, so minerals and vitamins, they're needed in very small amounts compared to are macronutrients like energy and protein, but these minerals are very important when it comes to overall performance, and specifically in the immune function, in the skeletal system, and then also within our reproductive or fertility. If we look at the graph there on the left, we have the mineral status over time. Right, so if we start off with an adequate level of minerals, all is going well. But when we start to deplete those minerals, when they drop a little bit, we start seeing some subclinical signs that can start showing up without us really recognizing it being a mineral deficiency. When it comes to immune function, we could maybe see a drop in their immune system. Maybe more calves are coming up with pink eye, maybe more foot rot issues. We could see a drop in overall growth, maybe in our first calf heifers or calves, and then also a drop in fertility, right? Maybe more cows are coming up open, maybe those bulls aren't settling the cows. Those are all subclinical signs that may go back to a mineral deficiency over time. And then in more severe cases, right, we start seeing the clinical signs or maybe deformities that may happen when we're not meeting the mineral requirements of our cow herd and in our bulls. So mineral nutrition is important when it comes to correcting any imbalances that may be happening. Right? When it comes to minerals, there's a lot of things that can bind up, including other minerals, to make them unabsorbable for that animal. And so by providing a mineral supplement, we know that the animal is getting what they need from that supplement. Now, the form of supplement doesn't matter whether it's a loose mineral, a block, or a tub. What matters is that the animals are getting what they need in the amount that mineral is formulated for. Now, minerals play a key role in fertility and the reproductive system as a whole. Looking at the onset of puberty, semen quality, and fertility, that all goes back to mineral supplementation and making sure that they have the minerals they need. Now, the National Forage Survey, they conducted a study that across 18 states that looked at the mineral composition in forages, and what they found was that only 50% of the samples were deficient, or over 50% of the samples were deficient in both copper, zinc, as well as selenium levels. And so what this tells us is that we need to be supplementing minerals in order to bridge that nutritional gap that they're not receiving otherwise. So just quickly walking through each of these trace minerals. Again, trace minerals, although they're needed in small amounts, we'll look at quickly how they affect bull fertility in particular, first starting there with zinc. Now, zinc plays an important role in immune function. It also plays a role in the synthesis of testosterone, and we have seen that zinc supplementation can help both increase the sperm ejaculate volume as well as sperm concentration and motility in our bulls. Now, I'll talk later about this chelated or organic form of zinc, but just these chelated forms of zinc compared to the inorganic sulfates, oxides, and chlorides can also improve the fertility of those bulls versus the inorganic forms. Moving on to copper, right? Copper is necessary for enzyme function, and those enzymes are what help protect the sperm cells against the free radicals that go on within the body. And so copper deficiency may lead to a decrease in overall libido, a decrease in semen quality, as well as a delayed onset of puberty in our younger bulls. And so copper supplementation is also necessary for fertility in that way. Moving on to manganese. Manganese is necessary for cholesterol synthesis. And what that means as far as in our hormones is that it's required for the hormones like testosterone. Now, when there's insufficient hormonal production, this may result in the abnormal sperm production in our bulls. And so that's how manganese gets tied in there. And then selenium. Selenium helps improve semen quality of the bulls, helps with the volume, motility, and morphology, and also helps decrease the percent bad or the dead or damaged cells that would be in there. They also help protect the spermatozoa from any oxidative stress that they may encounter. And also studies have shown that selenium supplementation can help increase scrotal circumference and testosterone secretion as well. So like I mentioned earlier, talking about chelated or organic trace minerals, these are minerals that are bound to an amino acid or a protein or a group of amino acids, compared to the inorganic that we've been supplementing for years and years, right? This is relatively new in the mineral nutrition world, but we have found a lot of good information and good results when supplementing with these organic trace minerals, and it's important to keep in mind here today. On the female side, we have seen that the organic trace minerals have helped improve the reproductive success in our females, weaning weights, higher weaning weights of those calves, and also the health of those calves. And we recently have more research out looking at the Bioplex organic trace minerals that Alltech makes, looking at how that can help improve the number of units, the semen units that can be collected from bulls. Now in this study, they looked at not feeding Bioplex versus feeding a Bioplex organic mineral, and what they found was that just based on the trace mineral form, they could collect 200 straws more per day per animal. And so let's say if we put a $20 number to this at 200 more units, we're looking at a $4,000 more increase in revenue because of what trace mineral form we use. So keep that in mind when you're looking at a mineral supplement. So to wrap up here, right, when thinking about fertility and performance of our bulls, when we can manage certain things to help improve that and reach their genetic potential that we're selecting them for. If we look at monitoring their body condition, if we look at conducting a breeding soundness exam and also evaluating their nutrition program specifically through the minerals, we can better manage our bulls to help really drive the reproductive performance and ultimately the profitability on your operation.